Lecture 12, Cost Curves, Part 2. Why does MC touch AVC and ATC at their lowest points? Let's look at this as if you're taking tests in this class. So we have the quantity of tests, we have the test score, the total score in the class, and let's say the total score is based only upon tests, the marginal score of each test, and the average score of each test. So you take the first test in economics and your test score is a 90. Your total in the class then, if it's only based on test scores, obviously is 90. The marginal score then is 90. You've gone from 0 to 1. The additional score now is 90, so that's the marginal score. And the average is the total divided by the quantity, which is 90. Let's go ahead and graph this. We're going to graph the marginal score, and when you graph marginal in economics, graph it between one unit compared to the next unit. When we plot that dot of 90, it's between 0 and 1. And then the average is right on the 1, and we've gone ahead and plotted your first grade. Let's say your second test score, as economics gets a little harder, you get an 80 on it for a total of what? 170. Because it's 90 plus 80 gives you 170, pretty easy. What is your marginal score then? Don't forget, your marginal score is the change in total divided by the change in output. Since the output is always going to be the next test, that's always going to be 1. It would be the change in your total score. That then is 80. And then your average is 85. It's 170 divided by 2 is 85. Let's go ahead and plot this. Again, plot the marginal between the quantities. Do you notice as the marginal is going down, that is starting to pull the average down, but it pulls the average down at a slower rate than what the marginal is. Let's say you take the third test, and the third test you don't do as well. We're still in the micro, which is a lot of difficult graphing, and you get 240. The marginal score then is the change in the total, which is 70, and the average is 240 divided by 3 gives you 80. So let's go ahead and plot that. The marginal is going down and it's pulling the average downward. Your fourth test, you don't do very well at all. In fact, it's the worst test score you get, and that's a 60. That gives you now a total of 300, which is now a marginal score of 60 and an average score of 300 divided by 4, 75. Marginal is pulling the average down, but it pulls it down at a slower rate than the marginal is going. Finally, you're starting to pick up with economics again. Things are less busy for you, so you have time to study for your exam, and you get a 70 on it for a total of 370 in the class. Your marginal is 70, and your total is 74. Please watch. This gets important in this section on cost. Notice that the marginal is going up, but it's still pulling the average down. You take your sixth exam and you get an 80 on it. You're doing much better in the class. For a total of 450 for a marginal of 80. Now watch what happens to the average. The average starts to climb. Watch. You now get an 80 as your marginal, and if the marginal is above the average, it starts pulling the average up. Finally, you take your seventh test and you get a 90 on it for a total of 540. Your marginal is 90 and your average is 77. Notice that the marginal is above the average, and if it's above the average, it starts pulling the average up. What's important here is as marginal is going down, this is pulling the average down. But if marginal is going up and it's below the average, it still pulls the average down. Once marginal gets above the average, it starts pulling the average up. Again, if marginal is going down, average is definitely going down. If marginal is going up, it depends on whether marginal is below the average or above the average. And if it's below the average and it's going up, it's still pulling the average down. If it's above the average, it's pulling the average upward. I hope this gives you a better understanding of why when you draw these graphs, you must make sure that the marginal cost curve touches the average variable cost and the average total cost at their lowest points. You must draw these graphs correctly because a picture is worth 1,000 words, but a graph in economics is worth a zillion words. Draw your graphs correctly and understand the graphs.